call the Joint Inquiry Committee to order. We are here today because 3,025 innocent people, most of them Americans, were killed 53 weeks ago when terrorists stunned the world by hijacking domestic airliners and crashing them into the World Trade Center towers, the Pentagon, and a field in rural Pennsylvania. We are here today because so many Americans have been personally touched by these horrific events. We who are privileged to serve in the Senate think of our colleagues and staff as a family, and the Senate family, especially those of the Select Committee on Intelligence, suffered a special loss. Terry Lynch, who had turned 49 1 week before the attacks, was married and the father of two beautiful daughters, Tiffany Marie and Ashley Nicole. For more than 2 decades, he was a public servant. He spent several years on the bipartisan staff of the Senate Intelligence Committee, where he was our expert on Middle Eastern affairs. In 1999, Terry left government service and became a consultant. On September the 11th, 2001, Terry was attending a meeting at the Pentagon on the subject of extending military survivor benefits to military families. Every day, Terry's family and the Senate family mourn his loss. And we have him on our minds and hearts today as we begin the public hearing phase of the Joint Inquiry Committee's review of those events of September 11. Like all Americans, we now realize that terrorism is no longer something that happens over there to people on the other side of the globe. Terrorism can hurt people close to us here at home. In the days after September 11th, many were quick to blame the success of the terrorist diabolical plot on failures of intelligence or preparedness. These public hearings are part of our search for truth, not to point fingers or to pin blame, but with the goal of identifying and correcting whatever systemic problems might have prevented our government from detecting and disrupting Al-Qaeda's plot. The public hearings follow a series of 10 closed hearings, including one held on September 12. It is our task here to fulfill our oversight responsibility and to recommend reforms. We will follow the facts wherever they lead to provide answers to the American people and to improve our nation's security. While there have been many congressional investigations of significant events in our nation's history, including the several inquiries that followed Japan's surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, this is the first time in the history of the Congress that 2 permanent committees have joined to conduct a bicameral investigation. The Joint Inquiry Committee has hired an independent staff, negotiated with the executive branch over access to documents and witnesses, and coordinated with the federal judiciary to assure that our public hearings will not interfere with pending prosecutions. I congratulate my colleagues from the Senate and the House and our staff for their commitment and determination to fulfill our obligation to the American people. I am very pleased with our progress to date. As we enter the public hearing phase of the inquiry, our purpose is to inform the American people of our findings and to continue exploring what reforms will be necessary to reduce the chances of another terrorist attack on our homeland. As we said in the preamble to the scope of inquiry statement that the committee adopted in April, our review is designed to reduce the risk of future terrorist attacks, to honor the memories of the victims of the September 11th terrorist attacks by conducting a thorough search for facts, to answer the many questions that their families and many Americans have raised, and to lay the basis for assessing the accountability of institutions and officials of the government. To reach those ends, our inquiry is focusing on three key areas. One, the evolution of the terrorist threat to the United States and our government's awareness of and response to that threat. It is important that we gain an understanding of how terrorist organizations, particularly Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda, moved from being a relatively insignificant threat to American interests just a decade ago to their status today as America's #1 threat. Second, what the intelligence community and the active consumers of the government's intelligence knew or should have known prior to September 11th about the scope and nature of possible attacks on U.S. interest by international terrorists. By examining how and when the government recognized this evolving threat and how it responded to that threat, we will gain insights into the ways that we need to respond to terrorism. Clearly, this is not a static threat, but a rapidly changing and accelerating danger to America. Three, how the agencies that make up our intelligence community interact with one another, as well as with other federal, state, and local agencies with respect to identifying, tracking, assessing, and coping with international terrorist threats, including biological, chemical, radiological, and nuclear. The ultimate question we will seek to answer is this: how can we use the information that we discover during the inquiry to recommend and then to successfully advocate to the American people and our colleagues changes in the intelligence community that will reduce the prospects of another September 11? In this first open hearing, we will hear from two representatives of the groups that speak for the families of the victims of September 11. Christian Breitweiser is co-founder of September 11th Advocates. Stephen Push is co-founder and treasurer of Families of September 11th. They have been asked to speak to us about the impact of September 11th on their families and America, as well as what reforms of the intelligence community will guard us against future threats. We will then have the first of several presentations from the Joint Inquiry Committee's very capable staff, led by Ms. Eleanor Hill. Ms. Hill is a former prosecutor, a veteran congressional investigator, a former Inspector General of the Department of Defense. We are extremely fortunate to have a person of her experience and capabilities as the committee's staff director. Ms. Hill will review the work of the Joint Inquiry Committee over the last 6 months, including the 10 closed hearings, interviews with nearly 500 individuals, and a review of more than 400,000 documents. Following her presentation, members of the Joint Inquiry Committee will be recognized for comments and questions. In future open hearings, we will hear from customers of intelligence, including representatives of the Defense and State Departments, frontline personnel from intelligence agencies, and then key leaders of the intelligence community, including the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency and the Director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. I now recognize Congressman Porter Goss, Chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence and co-chairman of the Joint Inquiry Committee, for opening remarks. I am extremely pleased to have Congressman Goss as a partner in this effort.